Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second Bellwether District Community Meeting of 2024. We're going to wait a few minutes to let more attendees join, and we'll get started in just a minute. Thanks for joining us tonight. Hi, everyone. If you just joined us, we'll get started in just a few minutes. We're waiting for a few more attendees to join us. Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bellwether District's second community meeting of 2024. My name is Mia Fioravanti. I'm on the corporate affairs team here at the Bellwether District. Before we begin, I'll just share a quick reminder on how we will run Q&A tonight. We encourage you to enter any questions you may have in the Q&A throughout the meeting tonight. But we will be taking questions following tonight's presentations. When we get to Q&A, if you would like to ask your question live, please raise your virtual hand, and my colleague Charlene will give you the ability to show your camera and unmute your line. We ask that if you are asking a live question, you please limit to one question per person so we can give everyone equal time. We'll also be limiting each question and answer to 2 minutes so we can try and get in as many as possible this evening. We will take as many questions as we can until about 7:15 p.m. tonight. And if we don't get to your question, as always, we'll post responses to both answered and any unanswered questions to our website following the meeting. Also, later in tonight's presentation, we'll share dates for our remaining 2024 meetings. If you're interested in the Bellwether District covering a specific topic at one of our upcoming meetings, please enter that information in the chat or send us a note at our website, thebellwetherdistrict.com, and we'll be sure to incorporate that into a future meeting. As a reminder, recordings and presentations of all of our recent meetings can be found on our website at thebellwetherdistrict.com under the community section. Next slide. So tonight, our team will provide an update on environmental remediation activities, a development update, and then I will share an update on our community and workforce development efforts. Next slide. So as we've done in past meetings, wanted to start by sharing how our project will benefit our city and region over the next 10 to 15 years. In total, we expect a $4 billion investment in the remediation and redevelopment of the site. On an annual basis, we anticipate $100 million in tax revenue for the city of Philadelphia and $120 million in tax revenue for the Commonwealth. As you'll hear tonight, we're already and will continue to make investments in our local community and workforce development initiatives. This includes internships and pre-apprenticeship programs, scholarship funding, and support for local South and Southwest-based organizations. According to our latest economic impact study, we're projected to add 19,000 direct permanent jobs and 28,000 direct construction jobs over the next 10 to 15 years. And we are making significant investments in, reconnecting the site to the neighboring community, constructing LEED certifiable buildings and other green infrastructure, and of course, demolishing and remediating the former refinery site. Next slide. So here's just a quick reminder of our timeline for phase 1, which is our current phase of development. First, we're substantially complete with the decommissioning and demolition of the former refinery. Environmental remediation activities began before our ownership and will continue throughout the project. On our logistics campus, we broke ground on our first building last year, and we expect building 1 to be complete by end of 2024 and to complete a second building by 2025. On our innovation campus, earthwork began in early 2024, and we expect construction on our first building to begin next year. And we're always focused on sharing information with and investing in local community, particularly our neighbors in South and Southwest Philly. Next slide. Thank you. And then we're also just continually focused on these broader project goals. So because the site has really been, walled off from the community for 150 years, our team is focused on, reconnecting the site to the neighboring street grid, creating new internal streets, and increasing opportunities for public transit to the site. Also very focused on creating new green pathways throughout the site. So, building protected bicycle and pedestrian pathways, constructing on-site stormwater management infrastructure, and we anticipate planting thousands and thousands of new trees and plantings over the next 10 to 15 years. And last, we're looking to construct the site as, sustainably as possible and with climate resiliency in mind. So as we've shared previously, just by the refinery closing, there was a reduction in the city's carbon emissions by 16%, which is a huge amount. We're also engaged in sort of a rebalancing exercise on the site to bring the entire site out of the 100-year floodplain and buildings out of the 500-year floodplain. And our plans include the construction of LEED certifiable buildings and investment in other green infrastructure like electric vehicle charging stations. So with that, I will turn it over to Juliana Connolly.
Thanks, Mia. You can go to the next slide. Good evening, everyone. So I lead environmental remediation activities for HRP and here at the Bellwether District in Philadelphia. And before I talk about any environmental remediation activities at this property, I always like to start with a reminder that there are two, what we would call under environmental regulations, responsible parties at this site. So there's two different parties that are conducting remediation activities at the site. And by remediation, what I mean is cleanup of chemicals that have been released to the soil or the groundwater at the property. So those two parties are ourselves, HRP, the Bellwether District, formerly known as PESRM, or Philadelphia Energy Solutions Refining and Marketing. That is one group. And then the other group is Evergreen or Sunoco. You'll hear us use both of those names. The easiest way to think about who is responsible for what is that there is a timeline that divides responsibility that has stayed with Evergreen Sunoco, and then responsibility that is now ours as sort of PESRM's subsequent responsible party. So that line in the sand is September of 2012. So any contamination that was released to the environment prior to September 2012 is Evergreen Sunoco's responsibility to clean up, and anything after that date is our responsibility to clean up. And most of that cleanup is occurring collectively under what's called the Pennsylvania One Cleanup Program, which is a way for us to address obligations under both Pennsylvania and US EPA regulations. But you'll typically hear us talk about Act 2, or the Pennsylvania Land Recycling Program, is the regulatory program that we're submitting our data and regulatory reports under, both ourselves and Evergreen Sunoco. So anything before September 2012 is Sunoco and Evergreen's responsibility, and anything after September 2012 is ours, and I'll talk about those areas of the site in more detail in a few slides. In addition to that, before September 2012 and after September 2012 obligation, there's a couple additional things that we took on responsibility for as the developer of this site, or that we are responsible for under certain regulations. One is sampling beneath all of the above ground storage tanks that many of you may remember used to be present on the site. So there were many very large, over 150 large above ground storage tanks across the site. Those all need to be sampled beneath after they were demolished. The intent of that sampling is to see if there is additional contamination under those tanks that was previously unknown, because nobody could sort of look underneath them because they were in place for so long. That is our responsibility. Another obligation that we are responsible for is managing the soil as we move it around the property as part of the development. So soil, some of you may see this as you drive by the site, soil is being moved around the property as part of grading to allow for the new development. And we prepared a document called the Soil Management Plan prior to our acquisition of the property in June of 2020 that provides details about how that soil will be managed, so that we can make sure that it's managed appropriately and safely, and that it ultimately is positioned in a place that doesn't pose a harm to anybody on the site or nearby. And the third thing that I'll mention that we are also responsible for is what we call vapor intrusion. Vapor intrusion is a process by which volatile chemicals, by volatile I mean chemicals that can move into the air phase versus being just in the solid or liquid phase. So it's a process by which volatile chemicals can move through the soil and potentially into the indoor air of buildings, and people could be exposed to those chemicals that way. So we, because we are the party that's building new buildings on the site, are responsible for evaluating the potential for that pathway and mitigating it if there is the potential for that to occur. And what I mean by mitigating is installing a system that would prevent that migration from occurring. The last thing I'll say on the Evergreen Sunoco side is, in addition to, similar to how we sample beneath all of the ASTs that came down, we also demolished all of the refinery units that were in place at the site. And those similarly could have sort of obscured contamination that may have been present in the subsurface. And the responsibility to go and sample under those units fell with Evergreen and Sunoco. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about sort of those different categories that I just went through. So our work under Act 2 for contamination that occurred after September 2012. I'll talk about our work sampling under the ASTs, and I'll talk about our work managing soil at the site. I'm not going to talk about vapor intrusion just yet. That's the other responsibility that I mentioned, mostly just because we're not quite there to occupied buildings yet. But as the buildings come up, you'll hear me start to talk about that vapor intrusion responsibility as well. So the first thing here is our obligations under Act 2. What I'm showing here are the 8 locations at the property where we have submitted what's called a Notice of Intent to Remediate, or an NIR, for releases that occurred after September 2012. And I'll have more details on these on the next slide. But what you can see here is that there are 8 locations, and they're discrete locations. Some of them are bigger releases than others, but they're separate from each other. They're not sort of the whole site. They can be sort of understood individually. They're releases that occurred at a certain time, and we know when they occurred. They all occurred after September 2012. So these are the 8 locations where we're bringing contamination that's known to have occurred after September 2012 through the Act 2 process in Pennsylvania. And if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about the 8 of those. So these 8 rows in this table correspond to the 8 stars that were on the figure on the prior slide. The 2 that I've changed the font to green here, I've done that because those are 2 release areas that we've notified the Department of Environmental Protection about through that Notice of Intent to Remediate, and that we've brought all the way through the Act 2 program. So these 2 that are shown in the green font are now closed under Act 2. So no additional action is needed for those. And all the regulatory reports associated with all 8 of these are available on our website. The link was on the prior slide. The additional 6 that are not yet green are releases that we're still working on, either collecting samples to understand the extent, or that we're actively remediating, or that we're working through regulatory reporting. And sort of the rightmost column, the right 2 columns sort of describe the status and our next steps there. So those 6 are ones that we're still working on, but they will eventually get to a point where we have brought them all the way through Act 2 and they're closed. You can go to the next slide. So this is a figure on the right that shows where all those ASTs, or above ground storage tanks, that I mentioned were located. You can maybe see the little circles, but also the color boundaries that are shown here. There are 9 of them, are groups of ASTs that we sort of group together just for organizational purposes, rather than accounting for 150 something ASTs individually and submitting separate regulatory reports for each of those. We grouped the ASTs into 9 different groups, and that's what's shown with those colored boundaries. And then there's multiple ASTs within each of those groups. Tank group 5, which is the green one that's sort of in the middle of the site, at this point, it has achieved regulatory closure. So it's a different regulation than Act 2, but it's a similar concept. You're looking for contamination, evaluating whether remediation is necessary. So that one has achieved regulatory closure. The other 8 we're still working through, meaning we're either still collecting samples because the tanks have been demolished more recently, or we're working through data analysis and regulatory reporting. And as I mentioned earlier, the objective of the sampling here is to try and figure out whether there was contamination under these tanks that we previously didn't know about, because that you couldn't sample underneath them because the big tank was in the way. So a lot of what we're doing now with the sampling is trying to sort out whether the analytical results from those samples is indicative of new releases or is consistent with the known contamination that was already there. And so that can be a complicated process. The site, as you all have heard, was an active oil refinery for over a century. And so there is existing contamination, pre-existing contamination. And so a lot of the data analysis that we're working through now for these 8 areas that have not yet been closed is trying to sort through, have we identified evidence of new contamination, or is the contamination we've documented consistent with what is already there? And all of the regulatory reports for these tank groups are also available on our website at the location indicated at the bottom of this slide. You can go to the next slide. I mentioned earlier our obligation to manage the soil in accordance with the soil management plan and to make sure that the soil is sampled prior to our moving it, and to make sure that it's handled appropriately during grading, and to make sure that we know where the soil ended up. So more contaminated soil has restrictions on where it can be located. Less contaminated soil has less restrictions. So we need to make sure that the more contaminated soil is kept separate from the less contaminated soil, and that the soil all ends up in a place that is consistent with what was approved in the soil management plan. So earthwork began at the site a little over a year ago, so in May of 2023. Prior to that, we sampled all of the soil that was going to be moved at a frequency of 1 sample per 2,000 cubic yards. And for reference, we're moving millions of cubic yards of soil around the site, so we have a lot of data, and those data are all also available in reports on our website. And then in terms of the tracking, while soil is moved, we have representatives from an environmental consulting company who are on site every day watching soil. They know the sampling results, they know where the soil is and is not allowed to go, and they observe and document how the soil is moved. One other thing I'll mention, sorry, if you go back just one slide. The last thing I'll mention as we talk about soil movement is that movement of some of the soil at the site, particularly soil that is petroleum impacted, has the potential to cause odors while it is moved about. And we do have protocols in place to manage those odors should they occur. They don't occur everywhere at the site, but they do occur in certain pockets of the site. And what happens if odors are generated during soil movement is that we have certain mitigation measures that we can take to minimize those odors. One of those would be to stop work. If it's a particularly windy day or something like that, we could simply just stop work and come back when environmental conditions, when sort of weather conditions are better. Another option is to change locations or change the means by which we're moving soil, the type of equipment, that sort of thing. We also have mitigation foams or other products that can be applied and that minimize the odors in the VOCs. So I just wanted to give a little introduction to that concept, and one of my colleagues later who'll talk more about the actual earthwork that is going on the site will talk more about the specific mitigation measures that we're using with respect to odors. You can go to the next slide, thanks. And the last thing I'll mention, this isn't one of the obligations that I talked about in the first table, but it's monitoring that we are doing to make sure that the earthwork that we're conducting on the site does not cause nuisance or inappropriate conditions off the site. And so this is air monitoring that we conduct at the perimeter of the property. And if you look on the right, you'll see there are 10 locations where we monitor for 2 things. We monitor for dust, and we monitor for what are called volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. So these are the types of compounds I was talking about earlier when I was talking about vapor intrusion. These are compounds that have the potential to be present in the air. So at those 10 locations, we monitor for dust and we monitor for VOCs. I'm showing the 4 to the north in a different color than the 6 to the south. That's just simply reflecting the time when those monitoring locations began. So earthwork began in the southern area where you see the blue locations in the spring of 2023, and that monitoring began at that time. The earthwork in the northern area has begun more recently, just this spring. So those 4 locations were brought online this spring. The monitoring is continuous. So these locations sample continually, and they actively provide alerts to our team if the levels start to increase. And that's super important because it allows us to respond in real time. So if we see VOC levels start to creep up, if we see dust levels start to creep up, we can take action to mitigate those conditions before they get too high. And all of that, like those protocols, are described in a air monitoring plan that is available on our website. The last thing I'll say is sometimes the odors that I talked about on the prior slide and increased VOC concentrations, sometimes those will occur together and sometimes they'll occur independently of each other, meaning sometimes the things that you can smell they're not necessarily that volatile that you pick them up on this VOC monitor. And that's why we monitor both for odors and VOCs at the perimeter. We monitor for them both. So we look for them independently, and we have mitigation measures that can address them together or independently, depending on how we encounter them. And I will hand it over to Blake.
Thank you, Juliana. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is Blake Rome. I'm the Senior Vice President of Development at the Bellwether District. I focus primarily on our logistics campus. I'm here tonight to run through a quick refresher on our master plan, as well as progress that we've made on our logistics campus. If you go to the next slide. So this master plan you may have seen before. It really hasn't changed in the past 9 to 12 months, but our site, it encompasses over 1,300 acres, but we're really focusing on about 1,000 acres just east of the Schuylkill River. As we work through the master planning process during the decommissioning and demolition of the old refinery, we landed on bifurcating 2 separate campuses, our innovation campus to the north and our logistics campus to the south. Our innovation campus is approximately 250 acres, which will total to be about 3 to 4 million square feet of vertical construction over the next 15 plus years. That will represent about 8,500 jobs, permanent jobs for the innovation campus. Our logistics campus is really everything south of Passyunk Avenue. That represents about 750 acres. It has the ability to hold approximately 10.5 million square feet of large e-commerce type warehousing product. We anticipate that this will bring about 10,500 jobs for just the logistics campus. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk through our logistics progress. So the map that you see on the right hand of the screen, everything that is shown in blue, we're currently permitted to start earthwork. And as Juliana and me had mentioned earlier, we started that back in May of 2023. So on the logistics campus, that represents about 447 acres. We started on our 2 parcels that are just shown in the most northern east corner of the site. That is our Unit 1 and Unit 2, which are the first 2 lots that we're starting vertical construction on. Over the course of the past year, we've worked on significant amount of demolition of existing underground piping, concrete structures, and then started to move earth from the most northern eastern part of our site to the southern area of our site as we've raised the site out of the floodplain, which I think we've gone through a handful of times in other meetings in the past. As you go to the next slide, we have some quick stats of some of the progress that we've made over the last year. We've removed over 75 miles of existing utility and refinery pipe. So as you can imagine, as we worked through some of the large scale above grade demolition of the refinery that you could see, we uncovered a lot of underground utilities throughout the demolition process. With that, we were able to decommission, remove, and then recycle that pipe. In addition to that, we also removed over 24 miles of existing utility pipe. That's domestic water, storm water, all old infrastructure that was existing for the refinery that we're no longer using, and we're getting it out of the way for the new mass earthwork and future vertical development. And again, another quick stat, 50 miles of underground refinery pipe, that's actually the piping that would bring the product from the refinery plants through to the tanks that you saw throughout the site. So it's just incredible in terms of the amount of piping that we found underground. To date, we've moved over 1.3 million cubic yards of soil on the site. We are continuing to move anywhere between 10 to 15,000 cubic yards of material between our 2 campuses on a daily basis. And we still have well over 1 million yards to move. From a stormwater perspective, obviously, as we worked through some of the earthwork activities, we began to excavate for new stormwater basins. Today, we have the capacity to hold over 45 million gallons of new stormwater based on those sediment basins. All of those are ultimately pumped to our treatment facility prior to being discharged. From a scrap perspective, as I mentioned just previously, we are taking all of the piping that we can that's out of the ground and scrapping it to ensure that we're recycling as much as possible. Through the end of May, we've removed nearly 5,300 tons, which is pretty great. And through the demolition process, and you can see just in the image all the concrete debris, we're sizing that down and then crushing that into a sizable gradation that we can use back on our new development site. So we can use it for stone under buildings and in areas where the existing dirt isn't exactly suitable for construction. If you go to the next slide, we have some good aerial photos just to illustrate some of the progress that we've made. If you look, so that's our new Hartram Street and Francis Harper Drive. All of that today is generally rough graded. And then you see our new building that's known previously as Lot 15. You'll see it on another slide as Unit 1 as we've worked through the progress. And that building is our first building of the 10.5 million square feet of new development. Just to the north of that is our second building pad. That site is now complete. If you go to the next slide, another quick aerial photo here, you'll see the Lot 11 surcharge. So that site is actually fully graded and it has additional material from a ground improvement process perspective that we are actually completed as of today. And we have the ability to remove that material and start vertical construction when it feels best to do in the process. We have our Lot 9, which is another almost 1 million square foot building that is currently being prepped. We hope to have that completed over the next couple months and to prepare that for vertical construction. If you go to the next slide. So there's a significant amount of infrastructure that we've talked through a handful of times in the past that is just getting kicked off. On the map that you see to the right, we have the red lines that you see. That is our new on-site roadway, that Hartram Street and our Francis Harper Drive. And then the blue is all of the improvements that you're going to see on 26th Street, as well as the intersection at 26th and Penrose. So since our last meeting, we've executed an agreement with BSI Construction. They're on site, and we have received all our necessary permits and private cost agreements with the city to begin construction. So we've actually started the new sanitary, and we are in process of starting the new water line installation. Through the next 6 to 9 months, we will continue on the first phase of infrastructure. That red line that you see there is approximately 3,700 linear feet or so of new roadway. And we'll work through that to provide access to our first two buildings that you see just to the east of that red line. If you go to the next slide, I think it's a very cool rendering of our new infrastructure improvements and really what you're going to see likely in the next, hopefully 5 to 6 or 7 years. But the new intersection work at 26th Street will commence over the next handful of weeks. We've had a significant amount of pre-construction meetings with the streets department and PennDOT to prepare for this. And what you'll see there are significant improvements to the traffic pattern. We're actually adding 2 additional lanes as you travel northbound 26th Street to make a left into our site. And then the intersection of our site coming out will encompass 7 total lanes. That's 3 lanes coming into our site and 4 leaving our site, none of which will have the ability to pass through onto Hartram Street and head into the residential development. So you'll either be able to go east on 26th or west on 26th Street. So if you go to the next slide, as you've probably driven down 26th Street or over the Platte Bridge, you may have seen some of the progress on our first vertical build. This is a 326,000 square foot speculative warehouse. So we are building this today without a tenant. But as you can imagine, as these walls started to be erected, we have begun to talk to some potential tenants, and we hope over the coming months to be able to provide some exciting news for the city. This building has made great progress. We are actually done with the structural steel erection as of today, and we are beginning to install the roofing material over the next couple of weeks, and then we'll begin to work inside the building. We'll start to complete the envelope of the building, and then start the MEP process as well as the site work on that building. So we anticipate that the building will be done by the end of 2024 in conjunction with our infrastructure work. If you go to the next slide, this is our Unit 2 building. We are nearing the end of the building permit process, so we hope to have that in hand over the next couple days. The general contractor that will be building it is Arco Design Build. We hope to be able to get started in the next handful of weeks, so really, summer of this year. That building is about twice the size of the first building. So it's 727,000 square foot cross dock building that is built the same way, speculative today, not a tenant. However, we're designing it in which that the building could be strategically demised to provide access to potentially 2 or more tenants. So we're very excited to start that building. We hope that gets started here in the coming weeks, as I mentioned, at which point we would target a completion in the summer of 2025. That will wrap up our first phase of new development on our industrial logistics campus, which will represent about 1 million square foot of new product. Once those buildings are leased up, our goal is to continue on and start building some of the other buildings that you saw in the master plan. So with that, I believe I'll be passing it on to Dave Messerschmidt on our innovation campus.
How you doing, everybody? My name is Dave Messerschmidt. I'm on the development team, or specifically to the innovation campus on Bellwether District, which, as Blake previously alluded to, is the 250 acres roughly north of Passyunk Avenue. If you want to go to the next slide. Our phase 1 of vertical development is right along Vare Avenue and Maiden Lane on the eastern portion of the innovation campus, and that's north of like the raised CSX rail that kind of comes through and bifurcates the two areas in here. So you can go to the next slide for kind of a close up on that phase 1. Phase 1 consists of 3 different buildings, 2 public roadways being Jackson Street and Fortin Way, and then some service drives to access the buildings. These buildings are currently being built in a CGMP fashion, which is a commercially good manufacturing practice type building. Similar to the industrial side, they are being built speculatively right now, and hoping tenants come soon. So next slide. Earthwork progress so far on the innovation campus. The main progress is on parcel A, which is north of that CSX rail. So subsurface demolition began in March of this year on parcel A. So we're a little bit behind, being about a year behind the industrial campus. So our numbers, our progress are going to be lagging behind that year as well. Mass grading then began in May, so exactly 1 year behind the logistics campus. Status right now, our subsurface demolition specific to the blue highlighted area there is approximately 40% complete, and then our mass grading is approximately 15% complete. Following the same guidelines as before, we're kind of leveling the site off on parcel A, preparing the first phase of vertical development. with ground improvements that will then go vertical. Anticipated completion specific to the blue area is year-end 2024. Go to the next slide. It's kind of an overview on an aerial of the currently anticipated plan and design for the first phase of development, being that parcel 1A that you saw on the previous slide. So building A, B, and C working north to south, Fortin Way coming down in the north-south direction, and then Jackson Street coming in east-west, connecting to Vera Avenue. Go to the next slide. Some aerials of the progress so far. What you're looking at here is essentially the preparation of the building pads for building A and B. Because of the close proximity between the two, it's being prepared as a single building pad with surcharge, which essentially mimics the load of the building that's going to be constructed there, and then prepares the subsurface ground for that loading once the vertical construction is underway and is on that surface. So go to the next slide. Just kind of a different view here coming in. This is along Vera Avenue and 76, looking in a northwest direction. All the subsurface and utilities and obstructions, including concrete, in this general area that you see kind of flattened out, have been removed to date. So that's part of that kind of that 40% progress stat that we provided before. You can go to the next slide. Some stats here on the progress. We're not in miles yet. I think we're a little late there. So approximately 50,000 linear feet of underground pipe have been removed to date, and approximately 35,000 linear feet of this pipe has been decommissioned and scrapped for recycling. Earthwork volumes to date, we've moved about 90,000 cubic yards of soil on site. And then stormwater volumes, we've placed, or we're going to place, over 1.7 million gallons of newer in progress construction stormwater capacity specific to this current limits of work. So recyclable metals, we've recycled over 800 tons of metal piping at this point. And then concrete crushing, we've demolished approximately 20,000 tons of concrete to date that we will be crushing and reusing on site in the future. Go to the next slide. As Juliana Connolly kind of alluded to earlier, this slide just kind of outlines some dust and odor suppression that we're doing. Dust control fabric has been installed on the perimeter fencing. So if you've driven by the site in the last couple of weeks, you've seen this up. You know, per the air management services entity with the city and the dust control permit we have, that fabric has been installed. Perimeter air monitoring is ongoing with monthly reports being distributed via our website. We have water trucks traversing the site daily to distribute water on haul routes and anything being disturbed. And then we have various odor suppression methods available to be used to suppress or minimize the odors as needed. Some of the photos here show the dust control fabric, the water truck, odor suppression foam, which is one of the methods that we've utilized on site to suppress the odors, and then misting fans that are being procured for the site as well. And then the bottom photo is just a photo of that air monitoring station that's constantly monitoring and reporting to us on the dust and the VOC levels at the perimeters. So with that being said, I'll turn it back over to Mia.
Great. Thank you, Dave. So I'll end our presentation tonight by sharing a few highlights on our community and workforce development efforts. Next slide, please. So there's been a lot of activity since our March meeting. As examples, we held a luncheon for past and current recipients of our annual scholarship program with the Community College of Philadelphia and HRP groups. CEO was in attendance. That was a great opportunity. This Earth Day, our employees participated in a volunteer event with Bartram's Garden, And we use that opportunity to announce a 2-year $100,000 contribution to support Bartram's Tree Coalition program. That program's working to increase the tree canopy in Southwest Philly and provide workforce opportunities for local residents. We again participated in the PA Attorney General's Career Awareness Week, an event in partnership with the school district during which local employers host Philadelphia school district students for career awareness activities. And last, if you would go to the next slide, we were very proud to host our first internship program for middle schoolers in late March. This happened during spring break. We hosted 6 middle school students from local South Philadelphia's Delaplane McDaniel School. This was a paid week-long opportunity during which students learned about the Bellwether District project and sort of the real estate and construction industry as a whole. Among other activities, students took a blueprint class, a financial literacy class, and other activities focused on potential career pathways in real estate and construction. So really excited to kick off that program for middle schoolers. Next slide. We're also gearing up for our annual summer internship program, which I know we've discussed on past public meetings. That effort is focused on high school age students. That is a 6-week paid opportunity for local high schoolers. Proud to share that over the course of the last several years, we've hosted 84 interns, including our high school and middle school age participants to date through these programs. So please, if your friends or family members are interested in future internship opportunities with us, please reach out via the contact form on our website. Next. We also just wanted to provide a quick update on our community benefits agreement process, which we've been sharing at all of our regularly scheduled public meetings. So just as a reminder, we're utilizing our community advisory panel for the CBA process, which is a group of 25 South and Southwest based community groups, 20 of which are participating in the CBA process. The process formally started last year in May. And so for the better part of the last year, we've been engaged with this group. We've held 8 meetings to really better understand what members would like to be included in a final CBA. And we're, really reaching the end of the process. So we will continue to report out towards the CBA at our future community meetings. Our goal is to have a completed CBA by end of summer. And then last, I just want to share our remaining 2024 community meetings, which are shown here. We'll also be holding our second in-person community resource fair this fall at our site. And we'll be sharing details on that hopefully in the near future. So I hope you'll join us for that great event. So with that, we'll open things up for Q&A. We do have a couple questions that have come in through the chat. So first from Russell, can you please publish your construction stormwater permit applications on your website? So Russell, permits for all final permits are posted to our website, and you should see a few up there if you visit the site today. So please look out for that particular permit in the near future. We also have a question from David asking for why can't this meeting be an in-person meeting or an in-person format, and providing some feedback that the virtual format feels impersonal. So David, really appreciate your question. These virtual quarterly meetings are just one of many opportunities to engage with the Bellwether District team. So in addition to our virtual meetings, we hold, as I said, an annual in-person community resource fair on our site, during which attendees have the opportunity to tour the site and engage with our team and ask questions in person. And this is in addition to a number of community events and presentations that our team engages in throughout the year. So last year, our team participated in over 60 in-person community meetings, presentations, and events with community groups. And so, you know, we really are engaging with community groups within the structure of their own meetings. And this is in addition to meetings with our community advisor panel, with whom we meet at this point almost monthly, and many of those meetings do occur in person. So we do engage in both virtual and in-person format meetings throughout the year. As for our virtual meetings, as you may know, we did update the format of our Zoom meetings so that people are free to share their screen and unmute their lines to ask questions. So hopefully that improves the experience a little bit. I'll share that our experience has been that attendance has been much higher at virtual meetings than with some of our other forms of engagement. So we really are happy to offer this option. That being said, thank you so much for your feedback. We're continuing to just refine our process and work to improve. Okay, another question coming from John. Is there any needed environmental remediation identified where the responsible party is currently disputed by either party? Is there a plan to handle disputed remediation responsibilities so they don't end up as a never-ending finger pointing, causing delay in remediation work? Juliana, I will turn that over to you.
Thanks, Mia. And John, thanks for this question. This is a great question and important to how our work proceeds at the site. So to the first part of your question, which was, is there any needed environmental remediation that's been identified where the responsible party is currently disputed? The answer to that is no. There are a couple areas that we're investigating to just sort out dates and come to an agreement between ourselves and Evergreen, but there aren't any that are sort of at a stalemate where like work is not proceeding. And then the second part, is there a plan to handle a condition should it occur in the future where we can't come to an agreement? We do have provisions in an agreement between ourselves and Evergreen that establish how that type of situation would be resolved. Either party, when we encounter potentially new contamination, has an obligation to notify the other party promptly. We have had a couple of conditions like that have come up during earthwork, and our coordination with Evergreen is very straightforward and works very smoothly. So we haven't had that situation, but yes, we do have provisions in an agreement that establish how that would get sorted out so it doesn't drag on forever, as you ask. I would also add that both we and Evergreen are appropriately incentivized by consent orders with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that we have obligations to move through the regulatory process. And should the department think that we're moving too slowly, they always have the opportunity to enforce against us under regulation. That is absolutely something we are not interested in, and so are incentivized to work out among our two parties how we'll move forward with contamination. So I hope that answers your question, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to that.
Thanks, Juliana. I'm actually going to turn to a pre-submitted question. Is there any aspect of the Bellwether District that includes education, sports, music, and the arts? So I'll take that one. From a community perspective, we have invested nearly $2 million to date in community philanthropy and workforce development. Those investments have included investments in educational opportunities, sports partnerships, both at a larger scale with the Philadelphia Eagles, for example, and with local youth organizations, and organizations that are focused on arts and culture. So as examples, we've had partnerships with Mural Arts Philadelphia, with the African American Museum of Philadelphia, and others. If the question is referring to potential future uses on the site, while we're currently building on a speculative basis, it's very possible we'll have future tenants in a number of those areas. We're just not in the position to share information on that today. So thank you very much for your question. Okay, and we have another question in the chat from Joseph. and just see Juliana coming on screen. In the 6-3 meeting, it was mentioned that the benzene levels were fairly high, although lower than previously. What are the plans to mitigate the benzene in the air, and how is that accomplished? I'll let you take that one, Juliana.
Thanks, Mia. And just for folks who may not be familiar, the 6-3, the June 3rd meeting that's being referenced here is a meeting that we had, I guess it's 2 weeks ago, on June 3rd, that was related specifically to our sampling and regulatory closure of 3 hazardous waste storage areas that were used during the refinery's operation. And there was a question during that meeting about benzene concentrations in air that wasn't related to the topic of that meeting, but that did come up at the end. So the question here says that the benzene said that in the meeting, it was mentioned that the benzene levels were fairly high. Maybe that was mentioned by the person that was asking the question. I would not characterize the benzene levels as high. And I want to be really clear, as I mentioned before, we are not currently sampling at the perimeter for benzene. We're sampling for total VOCs. Total VOCs would include benzene, but we can't pull the benzene concentration out individually. And the reason we're monitoring for total VOCs is so that we can get data in real time, not collect a sample and send it to a laboratory to then get the results a couple of weeks later, because then we can't go back in time and sort of take action about that. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on the data sources. So the data that we collect currently is for total VOCs. Previously, during the refinery's operation, for the last year or two of the refinery's operation, and then for the first few years of our demolition of the refinery, we were collecting air samples at the perimeter from multiple locations for benzene analysis specifically. And that sampling was done as under a US EPA regulation that is specific to oil refineries. And all of that data is available on our website. I just want to make sure there's no confusion. It's different data than the air monitoring data that I spoke about earlier this evening. So that is the benzene data that we have, and it's quite a large data set. It was multiple dozens of sampling locations, samples collected every 2 weeks for multiple years. And what we saw in those data is that there were occasional elevated concentrations during the refinery operation and during demolition, likely associated with some former refinery equipment. But what we saw over time is those concentrations came down as the demolition proceeded, and they came down to levels that are more typical of just urban settings. And that's really what we were seeing towards the later end of the benzene sampling. So again, all of those data are available on our website. They're not current because we're no longer monitoring for benzene, but they were characteristic. And I have no reason to believe they're different, that the concentrations would be higher now. So just to make sure, so what are the plans to mitigate benzene in the air? There aren't any plans to mitigate benzene specifically in the outdoor air, because again, we don't see levels that are different than typical urban settings.
Great, thanks, Juliana.
Yep.
We have another question in the chat. What are the plans for Bellwether District? I'm sorry. What plans for Bellwether District are included in the I-95 revive traffic plans of the 1,300-acre new development? Could overburden current roadways access to I-76 95 at the Broad Street intersection, Waldwoodman intersection? So I think I will turn that over to Blake.
Yeah, thanks, Mia. And great question. I appreciate it. So we are in constant communication at this point with the Philadelphia Streets Department and PennDOT. We are working through that coordination. That is something that is very much on our radar as we begin the construction activities. We don't have really much to present tonight in terms of what mitigation efforts are going to be presented at the time of construction and as those detours are ultimately allocated through that effort. But what we can say is that we're in constant communication with them. We're working through those efforts in terms of when that construction activity will occur during peak hours or off peak hours and otherwise. And so we can certainly get back to you on further developments on that as we get closer to starting significant construction on that work. So appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Blake. We don't have any additional questions in the chat currently. We'll wait another minute or two. Okay, thank you so much to everyone who joined us this evening. Just as a reminder, a recording of tonight's meeting, as well as questions and responses, will be posted to our website in the near future. And if you have questions in between meetings, you can always feel free to reach out to us via the contact form on our website at thebellwetherdistrict.com. Thank you so much and have a great evening.